Before the thunder of cavalry charges, before the gleam of katana steel under the rising sun, there was chaos. Japan, in its earliest form, was not a unified nation, but a patchwork of clans, fiercely independent, bound by blood, and ruled by war. In the misty centuries before the 10th century CE, the foundations of what would become the samurai class was slowly taking shape. Not through grand battles or noble oaths, but through necessity, survival, and the harsh realities of a fractured land. The earliest political and military structures in Japan developed during the Kofun period, around 250 to 538 CE. Powerful aristocratic clans known as uji dominated the landscape, vying for control over land and people. At the heart of this struggle was the Yamato clan, whose military and diplomatic supremacy laid the groundwork for the first semblance of imperial authority. These early Japanese rulers borrowed liberally from the continent, particularly from China's Tang dynasty and the Korean kingdoms. They imported writing systems, Buddhism, Confucian ethics, and, critically, military organization. By the Asuka and Nara periods from 538 to 794, a central government modeled on Chinese bureaucracy was introduced, including a rudimentary conscript army. But Japan is not China. The rugged mountains and island geography made centralized control nearly impossible. By the 8th century, the imperial court in Nara had begun to lose its grip on the provinces. Local aristocrats and powerful landholders, called Shuin lords, took matters into their own hands. They stopped relying on imperial conscripts and instead raised their own private militias. These militias were not yet called samurai, but they were the spark. The term saburao, meaning to serve, began to appear in the historical record. It was used to describe these provincial warriors, armed men who served the interests of landowning elites. These were the forerunners of the samurai, fierce, loyal, and above all, armed. By the Heian period, which spanned from 794 to 1185, the imperial court had moved to Kyoto. They focused more on aesthetics, poetry, and religious patronage rather than governance. Meanwhile, the countryside descended into banditry, clan feuds, and lawlessness. Into this power vacuum stepped the warrior clans. Two families stood above all others, the Taira and the Minamoto. Both the Taira and the Minamoto traced their lineage to imperial princes who had been demoted to the provinces. These former royals had war in their blood and ambition in their hearts. They didn't just defend land, they conquered it. The warriors they employed were no longer simple conscripts or hired swords. They were trained, mounted, disciplined. They adhered to a code of loyalty and were bound by honor. Their loyalty was not to the emperor, but to their clan leader. This marked the turning point. From scattered militias, a new military aristocracy was rising. Their role was no longer temporary or secondary. It was permanent, hereditary, and central to Japanese power. By the end of the 9th century, the samurai were no longer emerging. They had arrived. A warrior class, born from the ashes of clan rivalries, shaped by the failures of centralized control, and armed with a clear mission to protect, to serve, and to conquer. But the true story, the legend of the samurai, was only just beginning. The court of Heian, modern-day Kyoto, was a world of elegance and refinement. Silken robes brushed polished floors. Poets composed verses by lantern light, and the emperor ruled in name only. Beneath this mask of culture and calm, Japan was crumbling. As the imperial court grew ever more detached, real power slipped into the hands of those willing to seize it by force. It was the provincial warrior, hardened by the sword, not softened by poetry, who began to dominate Japan's real political landscape. In the countryside, powerful landowners, or daimyo, held vast estates known as shuan, exempt from taxation and imperial oversight. To protect their lands, they employed men who could fight, ride, and kill. These men were saburao, those who served. It was in this era, during the Heian period, that the word samurai emerged as a class distinction. These warriors were no longer mere retainers. They were warriors by birth, trained from childhood, tied to their lord by loyalty, honor, and blood. Two clans came to define this new age of warfare and ambition, the Taira and the Minamoto. Both were descendants of imperial blood, but both had become warriors first, nobles second. As the imperial bureaucracy withered, these clans grew into rival military machines. Fierce, efficient, and destined for conflict. The Taira clan, under the brilliant and arrogant Taira no Kiyomori, rose to dominate the capital. He placed his allies in court, married his daughters into the imperial family, and ruled Kyoto like a shogun in all but name. Yet his arrogance bred enemies. Opposing him were the Minamoto, driven into exile but never broken. In 1180, the smoldering rivalry burst into flame. Prince Mochihito, seeking to wrest power from the Taira, called upon the Minamoto for aid. This was the spark that ignited the Genpei War, a 5-year civil war that would reshape Japan forever. The Genpei War, spanning from 1180 to 1185, was more than just a military conflict. It was the crucible in which the samurai forged their identity. On land and at sea, from snowy mountain passes to burning temples, samurai fought, died, and achieved eternal glory. Heroes emerged. One was Minamoto no Yoshitsune, a brilliant, tragic general, master of surprise attacks and naval battles. Though betrayed by his own brother, his legend would echo through Japanese history and literature. The war climaxed in 1185 at the Battle of Dan-no-ura, a naval confrontation in the narrow straits of western Japan. The Taira were annihilated. Their child emperor Antoku was drowned at sea by his own grandmother, who leapt with him into the depths rather than let him fall into enemy hands. Victory belonged to the Minamoto. But in triumph, a new world order began. In 1192, Minamoto no Yoritomo, the shrewd and cold-hearted brother of Yoshitsune, was granted the title of Sei Taishogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo, by the emperor. But everyone knew what that really meant. Yoritomo was now Japan's true ruler. Thus began the Kamakura shogunate, and with it the age of the samurai had officially begun. No longer just retainers, the samurai were now the ruling class. The sword had supplanted the brush. The bow had silenced the pen. For the next 700 years, the samurai would dominate Japan, not just as warriors, but as statesmen, philosophers, and icons of Japanese identity. But with great power came great challenge, and the warrior who rules must defend his rule.